the first time now? How many saw it first time? Wow, okay. Gosh, I remember this when I saw it for the first time a few months ago, and it stuck with me. It's really good. So I'm so pleased to, first of all, introduce the visual effects supervisor of the film, Richard Hollander. Come on down. All right, welcome. And have a seat right there. And you know him, an Academy Award-winning producer of so many movies, Titanic, Avatar, everything else, and this, Jon Landau, right here.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Look at this good crowd here on a Sunday morning. Very nice. John,
I'm just back from New Zealand, so it's really Monday for me.
That's right. He's been shooting a tiny little movie called Avatar 2. 3, 4, 5, yeah. So thank you for flying back just to do this. This movie has been a long time coming. I mean, when did you first get involved and James Cameron? It was like something like 20 years ago, wasn't it?
It was around 2000. We were introduced to ALITA by our friend Guillermo del Toro. And when he introduced it to us, we looked at it and we said, this movie, this property, has so many of the themes that are in Jim Cameron's films.
Yeah.
Themes about empowerment, female-centric, really aspirational characters. And we started developing it as something for Jim to direct himself.
Yeah.
And he actually went out and started writing it. And then a little project called Avatar came along. And once that was done, we realized that Jim was not going to have the time to do ALITA. And we started looking for the right director to partner with. We didn't want to turn it over to somebody. It was too important to us. And we went through a number of different people. And then after a social lunch with Robert Rodriguez, who said to Jim, if you're doing Avatar for the next umpteen years, what happens to movies like ALITA? Jim said, do you have a minute? And he took and showed him an art reel we had done, shared with him the script, and we were on our way with Robert.
And that's it. And how did that change creatively at all from, Jim had written this massive script, I think 180 pages.
186 pages.
Wow. And then even more than that, the treatment was like 600 pages, right?
Yeah, so what happened was, Jim gave Robert the 186-page script and gave him his 600 pages of notes that he also had. And said, if you can crack this, you can direct it. And really in an unprecedented way in our industry today, Robert, without a deal in place, went away for 4 months and came back and brought us a script that was 127 pages. Now, Jim went to read it, and Jim said in his mind, I'm going to read this and I'm going to hate it because everything that I love is going to be gone. Yeah. And he got to page 21, he said, this is my favorite scene coming. It was still there. And then he got to the next one, and it was still there. And what Robert did, he understood the themes that were important to Jim. And he focused it on that, and he got rid of all of the extra information, more detail than people really needed, right, to focus it down. And we finished reading the script. And that was the best audition any director could have, because it really told us his sensibility on how we would approach the film. And then we said to Robert, okay, Robert, we have a couple of things that are important. And I went and met with Robert. I said, if you're going to do this movie with us, we want you to hire a cinematographer. Because we want you to focus on directing. So we hired Bill Pope. We said, we want you to hire an editor. We hired Steve Ripken, who had done Avatar with us and a number of other movies. We said, we want you to hire a composer. These are all things that Robert would normally do. And then lastly, we said, we want you to hire Weta Digital, because nobody does, facial performance better than they do. And he agreed to all of those things, and we had a great collaboration over the time doing it.
Wow. And speaking of Weta Digital and all the special visual effects here, when you see the creation here of ALITA, it's extraordinary. It really is a step forward, Richard, isn't it? Even with Avatar and all the stuff that you had, all the knowledge you had of that, how challenging was it after that? And how did the timing work out for the making of this movie? Maybe you couldn't have done it 5 years earlier the way you wanted to, or?
I'll add that John approached us. I was working for Rhythm and Hughes a long time ago, and we bid on ALITA. I don't know, it was 13 years ago now.
Before Avatar, because Jim was
Before
not sure
Avatar.
which one he wanted to do.
Oh,
and,
wow.
and it really wasn't going to be the same movie if it was made then. You know, it was going to be difficult at that time. It was still difficult to make the movie just recently. And I think that I'll speak for Weta that the most challenging thing about the production was the notion that Rosa Salazar, the actress who's going to play Alita, and everywhere she was in her motion capture performance, suit with, cameras on her mouth. And every single time she came onto a live action set, the whole movie was a live action movie. There was, I shouldn't say it's whole, but everything to do with the actors was always based on the actors, real people with Rosa. Zapan, the guy, is a real, it's Ed Screen, and he's redone. Everything was that way, and it required a tremendous amount of care to get this to happen. In order to do it physically, the whole set, every single set was basically a performance capture volume. Everywhere we went, it was Weta technicians came around and did this miraculous job of placing cameras and placing the required equipment to get her performance and all of her performance, along with a lot of other cameras shooting reference photography all the way through it. It was a chore, and it was amazing to see, and they were quite successful doing that.
When we approach this, and if you'll listen to us talk, I use the term performance capture and not motion capture.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want the motion of the performer. We want the emotion. And it's about the performance. So we try and create a paradigm of production that focuses on the actor-centric process. So Rosa Salazar, in this case, was able to play a scene with Christoph Waltz, standing right there. Christoph, one of today's great, actors, who is very performance-centric and doesn't want technology to get in the way of his process.
Right.
He loved this. Rosa was there. Rosa could come cuddle with him on the couch in the fatherly moment. It's one of my favorite moments. All of the interaction that she does, from hugging him to kissing Hugo to all that, that's what makes this all so different. I would tell people that on Avatar, we needed to be photographic because you couldn't tell me what real was on Pandora. In this, we had to be photoreal every step of the way because we are in a real world that we can all relate to, and that's a higher standard.
It's amazing. And by the way, Rosa was wanted to and was going to be here. She's on location in Vancouver, and the production was freaking out about the weather, and they would not fly her here because they were worried about getting her back, and you know how it is making movies. So she's heartbroken that she couldn't be here.
But she did text me and say, John, I still want to do the sequel.
We want to see the sequel. That'll be great. What you just said I thought was so important because, although this is a masterpiece of technology and technical filmmaking and everything, it is the emotion, and it's always going to be the content that works. And what really works about this movie is that you really, after a few minutes, I forgot I was watching any kind of technology here. I was watching, a cyborg.
One of my fun stories is the first time we screened the movie for Rosa. And it was just her and I in our screening room at Manhattan Beach. And when the movie was over, she had tears in her face. And then she started talking about her performance on the screen. And it took her about 10 minutes to go, wait a second, that's not really me on the screen, but it is me on the screen. Because she saw Alita's performance and she remembered every nuance that she gave to go into that performance, and that's what she was seeing. And there was nothing for me, as someone who made that commitment to her in pre-production, nothing more rewarding than her responding that way. I was saying to someone earlier that, it's all the choices actors make is what makes them great actors. And what an animator does is oftentimes antithetical to what a great actor does. And you need both. Just like you need a great makeup artist, just like you need a great hairstylist, great sound mixer, all these things. Filmmaking is a collaborative effort. But what I look at as what we're trying to do with performance capture is to allow actors to play characters they could not otherwise play, and to sort of replace prosthetics of the past with a CGI technology where that performance still shines through.
Yeah, you really see it changing, day by day in this business here. I mean, look at The Irishman where they've de-aged them, and that would never have been thought possible.
Absolutely
And
not.
all of these breakthroughs, which must be fun as filmmakers to be able to play with all these toys too, and the ability of it. I want to, before I go to some questions with the audience, I got to ask about my favorite sequence, which was the motorball. I love the motorball. So can you tell us how that was done with all of those characters there?
Well, I assume that
With the mic?
I assume the motorball, the main race, yeah. So a lot of that is obviously, there's some real parts to it, and there's some unreal, very much unreal parts, but all the close-ups of everybody, that were human derived were photographed. And it was, I believe that, I'm trying to remember, but the Frame Store had a lot to do with it, as well as Weta, in composing much of the background and helping out with a tremendous amount of work, actually, in the motion picture.
And what we were trying to do is use performance capture where we could, but we also used a lot of traditional, visual effects techniques to create some of the shots. But one of the things we realized, and I say to people, that filmmaking is an imperfect art form. Visual effects can be a perfect art form. We don't want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the motorball, the camera shakes. If you look at the motorball, Jim was big on this. Flares, because that's what you would really get.
Right, yeah.
You would get flares. All of those things to allow the imperfections that we as audiences accept as the normal filmmaking process to come through and make it a natural experience. Then, once we had the basic, action worked out, we would bring in Rosa and we would do something that we call FPR, facial performance replacement, just like ADR. It's not audio, it's the full performance. And she would get there watching the sequence in front of her, and she would act it out.
Oh, wow.
And we would use her performance ultimately to drive the performance of the character.
I'm just going to add, it's called facial performance, but it's more than that, because we're getting her entire body. So if she performs it differently than when she did it before and has a different rotation on her body, all of that's incorporated and taken in. So it's a full performance.
Wow, it's amazing. Now, you guys, most of you just saw it for the first time here, so I'm interested to see what you think. But if you have any questions, just raise your hand. Yeah, right here in the front.
I would love to know how many scenes were filmed that did not make it to the final cut of this film. What were the scenes and why were they cut?
Okay, he wants to know what is going to be on the Blu-ray. Basically, what scenes were filmed but didn't make it in the final cut, and why, and maybe vice versa. What did you add from the original script that you looked at this?
I think for us it was mostly a honing down process. I think Robert, in going from 186 pages to 127, really got the extraneous scenes that we could afford to lose. There's certain things that we did that were juxtapositions, so that when we would see something play out, we would sit there and go, okay, it's for the, like when she's sort of the coming of age where she's coming to terms with herself, the scene where she has the candy and the scene where they went to the top of the church, that was sort of in a different order in the script. In watching the movie, we want to create a greater sense of time lapse. So we took the scene where she comes home at night, sneaks back in with Christoph Waltz already being in the room, and we put that in a different place to suggest that it was over a longer period of time. A scene that we added is at the very end of the film where she's in the locker room and the tear comes down.
Oh, yeah.
And she slices the tear. That was not in, that literally came out of us watching the movie, a thought inspiration, and we, that came out of a conversation with Jim, actually, and we just took that and ran with it, and then came back and showed it to him, and it, for us, it was a beat where we didn't go overly sappy in our minds. Some other people might disagree, which is okay too, but still held the resonance of the emotion there, because it is about the emotion of the character. So that was a scene that we did add, and had Rosa come back and perform.
Amazing. Yes, right there.
I have a question. This is more of a pipeline thing. So, if an actor makes a choice to do something in the movie, how far ahead of time do you have to know, or how much leeway do you have between the performance capture? Because I know sometimes you want to do something with fingers or something, they have to animate it. Like, how much leeway?
He's asking about actors, and basically if they add something, how will that screw everything up?
We make no choices about performance, zero choices, until the actors perform with each other. Look, from a performance capture standpoint, and I'm going to jump to an all performance capture, not live action for a second, but from a pure performance capture standpoint, you give a great performance once, we can use it in the close-up, we can use it in the wide shot. You don't have to repeat that performance. By definition, from an acting perspective, when you're playing off of someone, spontaneity can only happen once. That's just spontaneity. But more importantly, when you're doing a pure performance capture show and you're doing a dramatic scene, you're playing it opposite, right next to the actor you would be performing the scene with, and you're not playing it to a camera matte box with the actor behind it. So we shoot, Richard mentioned reference cameras. So on a show like this, we're shooting the actual framing because it's live action. All the reference cameras, they're shooting the hands. They're shooting the nuances of tension in a shoulder, all of that. That stays with the shot all the way through the visual effects process. So the visual effects company knows what did they do, what's the timing, how much pressure did they really, if he grabs her and holds her, how tense were those hands? We shoot 4 to 16 reference cameras on top of the live action shot to make sure that we're getting all that detail.
Some of them are in the film, and we had to remove them. That's how many there are.
Really? Wow.
I know that some of the nuanced material that Rosa did, where her hands went a certain way, were at one time we questioned it and looked at it and said, we've never seen anybody do that, but we've never looked at anybody's hands that closely to figure out how to animate them. And we just went with it. It was what she did during that performance.
Amazing. Yes, right there.
I have 2 questions. How did Rosa get the part, and are you casting for the sequel?
How did Rosa get the How did Rosa get the part?
So Rosa came in, and Robert came to town, and she met with Robert. And Robert said to her, people have been telling me that you're someone that I should work with. And Rosa's response was, they're right. But they had a very good meeting and a very good, informal, audition. There were a couple other women that we were thinking about, and we are firm believers in an old-fashioned screen test, where you literally bring in your top choices. We did it on Titanic for Kate's role. We did it on Avatar for both the roles, and we find a set, we create an environment, we put it up on film, and we pick scenes that span the complexity of the performance. Because it's not, you don't just want the person who can do the beginning of the movie, you don't want the person who can do, you need to do all of them. So we pick scenes that are representative of the arc of the character, and we film them. Generally we have the same actor performing opposite who's not someone we are auditioning. They're there, really to play off of it, and we focus the scenes. We cut the scenes together, like we put music to them, like it's a real scene, and we sit in a movie theater and we watch it.
Wow.
And Rosa, Rosa again made us all feel an emotional response to the performance she gave, and at that point, it was obvious that she was the choice. Now we cast her. We made that choice in May, and we started training her in all the the training, the wushu and the physical training and all the different stuff. And to her credit, her agent calls me one day and says, John, Rosa has a chance to go do a movie in Italy for 2 weeks. Would you let her go? And I said, of course. As long as she's back in time. He said, of course. He calls up Rosa, tells her this. Rosa says, no. I'm training for ALITA. I'm staying doing this. And she gave up this other part, to do that. And we're not yet casting ALITA.
Okay, yes.
Speaking more about the physical training that Rosa had to do, I know that she had to practice multiple forms of martial arts, acrobatics, but also
she's asking about all the training she had to do and everything, and how did that impact getting the actors?
Well, we wanted the actors to feel comfortable in the moments that we needed to use the actors. So when we're doing something like the street motorball game, the pickup game where she learns how to play, we had a professional skater who doubled Rosa. And we captured her body performance, but utilized Rosa's face performance by doing that process of FPR that I was telling you about. So we're combining that, but it's just making Rosa's performance, and the two of them would collaborate. They would talk before. What are you feeling? How are you doing? What's the motion? What's this? What's it like? I can't do that big jump, but tell me what it was like. And okay, great. How do you think you would react when you landed? And Rosa would convey that. So it's a collaboration, between the two. But the end result is you feel that it's of one performance. So we wanted to get Rosa as comfortable as possible on the skates for certain things, so she understood that. And there's stuff that she did do. And then when it got to a point where we wanted it amped up, someone else came in and did that. There's a question in the way back.
Oh, in the way back. Yeah, there you go.
So statistics. Do you have an idea of the number of visual effect shots versus the number of shots overall in the film?
Shots overall in the film to visual effect shots, 100%. No, but no, Richard.
It's above 1,600. I actually lost count. We just kept on doing them, as fast as we could. But
out of probably 1,700.
Yeah, it was a lot. Everything seemed to be touched by us, but there were very few untouched shots.
So even if we got into a shot of Hugo on the street was a set extension. What we tried to do, we built down at Troublemaker Studios really 2 stories of Iron City for about 8 or 10 blocks in a square. But you were always seeing above it. You were always seeing down a street. You were always doing all these other things. In addition to which, in populating those streets, we always had cyborgs, some of which we would have prosthetics there. Other times we would just do a blue screen or a green screen arm that later on we'd replace. So it's really funny that there are shots in movies that I've been involved with where I could put together a reel and show you 5 shots from a movie that you would swear, based on what you know, are visual effects, and they're not. And then I should show you 5 that you'd say are not visual effects, and they are, because there's some little thing that we had to fix in them.
Okay, in the back also, yeah.
About the previous for this movie. So I wonder how much, or did you end up improvising, or did you got the previous for the movie pretty much act as accurate as possible, and then on top of that, you just
The only place where we focused on pre-visualization were in scenes that were completely computer generated. So, for example, what we call the underworld fight, where they fight below, both characters in that are computer generated. We would do that through previs. The scene where she goes underwater.
Underwater, well, that was everything.
Right.
Yeah. And then also we did some previs, but not total previs for a lot of the motorball sequences. Ambush Alley, the fight with Nisiana, was roughed out. I don't think it was completed, but it was certainly useful in the rough forms. Austin Bonet did the underworld with his third floor group, and it worked out wonderful. But there's a bunch of it, but it's in, going up the supply tube at the very end was definitely previs by third floor in one particular version.
So how do we use previs? Previs is intended for things that answer production related questions. And the last scene is a perfect example. Why did we pre-visualize a dramatic scene? Because we tend not to. We prevised it so we would know what set piece to build. How much of that tube did we need to build? How much of the curve? How big did it need to be? We needed to create a big enough set that Rosa and Kian could perform on and act on naturally. So all the scenes that we've touched on, why we previs, because it had impact on production. But in terms of a dramatic scene of them on top of the kissing bridge, or her having breakfast, with Ito, those scenes we want to find in the moment by the director working with the actors.
Cool. Got time for one or two more. Yeah, right here.
Hi. I'm working on my 8th or 9th project with Jerry Reese at Imagineering. And on the flip side of that, not in the creative aspect, but they hired me because of the emotional talent that I brought to the party. So I've done facial capture, motion capture, Lucas and Medusa Rig and whatnot. However, my question is, on the casting side, I haven't auditioned for any films because it's so hard to find those casting opportunities specifically for motion capture and performance capture. What should we be looking for, and in terms of these opportunities available? Because I know it's like a needle in a haystack. I'm training, working with Richard Dorton and a number of other people to hone my craft, and I know there are a lot of people interested in, finding out how they can best train to be, for these kinds of opportunities.
Okay, she just wants to know about casting opportunities and performance capture and how to go about that, because she said it's very difficult.
For feature.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Feature, yeah.
Yeah.
So look, I think you talk about needles in the haystack. Unfortunately, it is whether it's performance capture or it's not performance capture. I think the basic principles and the basic practices that as a performer you need to follow, it is the training, it is the doing, it's going out there. You're not going to get a role in a performance capture movie because you're a good performance capture actor or actress. You're going to get it because you're good. You don't put that other caveat on it. So I think it's that same thing. And the more people can accept that, the better it is. And the great thing about performance capture, and Rosa is a great example of this. Rosa, I think, was 30 when she was playing a 14-year-old girl.
Yeah.
So performance capture opens up opportunities for actors and actresses to play those characters, like I was saying, that they couldn't play before. You still have to bring something great to it. And we would never, if we wanted an actor or an actress to look the way they look, we would never do it through performance capture. That doesn't make sense. But to provide an opportunity where we say, you can play this part, that's the opportunity. So I would just continue to do the same things you're doing and knock a lot of wood.
Knock on wood.
you.
Okay. Yes, right there.
So I recently had the pleasure of working with Robert, and for 4 months I never saw this man sweat. So I'm dying. No, seriously, he's just brilliant at what he does. Were there any challenges or obstacles that you saw him face while working on?
She's talking about Robert Rodriguez has worked with him and never saw him sweat, but she wants to know about challenges that you saw.
I think something we didn't say about this picture was that Robert is a director. He's done lots of films, and one of the main ideas as we walked in to go make the film was that we didn't want him to change his ways. And so that was a challenge, actually, and it was a challenge for the technology to be in place and to be as flexible as you can. Robert shoots, well, he's quite active in shooting, and he's off and running, and then he's off and running over here. We didn't want that to get in the way, and and actually there was some planning, and Robert held to it, which was that we only had a finite number of cameras to actually do the performance capture, and we set up an infrastructure such that we could run around, and Weta could run around and attach these cameras really fast and put them anywhere, get them up and running for Robert, whatever he wanted, whatever change it was. Turns out Robert, really working with his AD, did a wonderful job of just generally following a pattern, and then still kept us active. But that was a challenge.
I think the other challenge for Robert, and Robert and I was just texting with him, we're good friends, we speak, so I think that Robert in the past, before ALITA, never had the luxury of time. And that he was forced to make a decision based on options that were presented in front of him. And he'd always pick the best option. But he never had the ability to say, I want to go beyond those 3 options because I have the time to do that. Let's make it better. Let's do this. And we try to educate Robert. There's a balance we all have to fill, but that there were times where we could go back and go, okay, that's good. We want better. And it's okay to ask for it because you don't have 10 weeks in post. You don't have 6 weeks in pre-production. Let's go make it better. And that was a challenge for Robert to understand and accept that he could do that.
Well, I wish we could go on and on and on, but they're going to have to use this theater for another screening, and I think some of you guys have to go on to other things too. So let's thank Jon Landau
Thank you all for coming.
and Hollander for all coming out here today.